Today, we spend the hour remembering Archbishop Desmond Tutu. The South African anti-apartheid icon died Sunday at the age of 90. In 1984, Desmond Tutu won the Nobel Peace Prize for his work fighting to end white minority rule in South Africa. That same year, 1984, he traveled to Washington, where he denounced the Reagan administration's support for South Africa's apartheid government.
Apartheid is as evil, as immoral, as unchristian in my view as Nazism. And in my view, the Reagan administration's support and collaboration with it is equally immoral, evil, and totally unchristian without remainder.
In 1988, Archbishop Tutu risked jail by organizing a boycott of regional elections in South Africa.
I urge black people in this diocese not to vote in the October elections. And I hope that white Anglicans will join their black fellow Anglicans in that action. I am aware of the penalties attaching to this call. I am not defying the government. I am obeying God.
After the fall of apartheid and the election of Nelson Mandela as South Africa's first black president, Archbishop Tutu chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where he pushed for restorative justice. He would later become a vocal critic of the ANC, the African National Congress, under the leadership of Presidents Thabo Mbeki and Jacob Zuma. This is Bishop Tutu speaking in 2011.
Hey, Mr. Zuma. You and your government don't represent me. You represent your own interests. And I'm warning you. I really am warning you out of love. I am warning you like I warned the nationalists. I am warning you. One day we will start praying for the defeat of the ANC government.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu also slammed the ANC in 2011 for not granting a visa to the Dalai Lama, who was invited to attend his 80th birthday. Archbishop Tutu was a leading voice for human rights and peace around the world. He opposed the Iraq War. He condemned the Israeli occupation of Palestine, comparing it to apartheid South Africa. In 2014, he backed the Palestinian-led BDS, or Boycott, Sanctions and Divestment movement. He also spoke against torture and the death penalty. In 2011, he recorded a video calling for the release of imprisoned African-American journalist and activist Mumia Abu-Jamal.
Mumia's guilty verdict must be considered more than flawed. It is unacceptable. He has been denied the right to a new trial based on racial bias in jury selection, has faced years of prosecutorial and police misconduct and judicial bias.
Well, today we spend the rest of the hour hearing Archbishop Desmond Tutu in his own words. We begin by going back to February 15, 2003, when Tutu spoke before a massive rally in New York to oppose the imminent U.S. invasion of Iraq.
People marched and demonstrated, and the Berlin Wall fell, and communism was ended. People marched and demonstrated, and apartheid ended. And democracy and freedom were born. And now people are marching, and people are demonstrating, because people are saying no to war. We say no to war. The just war theory says you need a legitimate authority to wage war. Only the United Nations is that legitimate authority. Any other war is immoral. The Just War says, have you exhausted all possible peaceful means? And the world says, no, we haven't yet. And any war before you have exhausted all possible peaceful means is immoral. And those who want to wage war against Iraq must know it would be an immoral war. You know, those who are going to be killed in Iraq are not collateral damage. They are human beings of flesh and blood. They are children. They are mothers. They are brothers. They are grandfathers. You know what? They are our sisters and brothers. For we belong in one family. We are members of one family, God's family, the human family. And how can we say we want to drop bombs on our sisters and brothers, on our children? We said no to communism. We said no to apartheid. We said no to injustice. We said no to oppression. And we said yes to freedom. Yes to democracy. Now, I ask you, what do we say to war? I can't hear you. What do you say to war? What do you say to death and destruction? What do you say to peace? I can't hear you. What do you say to peace? What do you say to life? What do you say to freedom? What do you say to compassion? Well, we want to say, President Bush, listen to the voice of the people. For many times, the voice of the people is the voice of God. Vox populi, vox Dei. Listen to the voice of the people saying, give peace a chance. Give peace a chance. And let's say once more so that they can hear in the Pentagon, they can hear in the White House, what do we say to war? What do we say to peace? Yeah!
We're continuing to remember the life and legacy of former South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died Sunday at the age of 90. I interviewed him over the years. In 2004, I spoke to him at the Culture Project after a play about Guantánamo. I began by asking Archbishop Desmond Tutu what his response was to what was happening at Guantánamo.
I thought I knew what was taking place there, and I was quite shocked when I sat through the display yesterday just how devastated I was. I was particularly so because I had such an awful sense of déjà vu. For someone coming from South Africa, you said, but I mean, that's exactly what they were doing for exactly the same reasons that they gave. I mean, you said, why do you detain people without trial? Why do you ban people as you're doing? And the response from the South African government was security of the state. And anyone who questioned it would then be regarded, especially if you were white, as being unpatriotic. And I just want to say to you, is this something that you want done in your name? Isn't it time there was the same sense of outrage that people had about apartheid, which people should have had about the Holocaust? And what would happen if it was Americans held by some other country under these conditions? The point is, God has actually got no one. The God we worship is strange. They say this God is omnipotent, but God is also very weak. There's not a great deal that God seems to be able to do without you.
During your years in South Africa, before the end of apartheid, you were a deep advocate of nonviolence, yet you saw so many detained, so many killed. What do you feel, and what did you feel then? How did you make it through those days? What did you advocate? How did you stick to your principles of nonviolence?
One of the wonderful things, actually, is, when I've got to speak as a Christian, is belonging to the church and knowing that you belong to this extraordinary body. When things were really rough, it's wonderful to recall for me now, but I sometimes got, when the South African government had taken away my passport, I got passports of love from Sunday school kids here in New York, and I plastered them on the walls of my office, that although I couldn't travel, hey, here were all of these wonderful people all over the world. And I had I met a nun in New York at that particular time, and I asked her, can you just tell me a little bit about your life? How do you... And she said, well, I am a solitary. I live in the woods in California. I pray for you. My day starts at 2 in the morning. And I said, hey, man, I'm being prayed for at 2 in the morning in the woods in California. What chance does the apartheid government stand? So one was being upheld. And you know, when frequently you say to people, the victory that we won against apartheid, a spectacular victory, that would not have happened without the support of the international community, without the support of people like yourselves, without the support of those who were students at the time, who might have been crazies, but they were fantastic in their commitment. And in this country, actually, they showed that you could in fact change the moral climate. Because at the time, the Reagan administration was totally opposed to sanctions. And students, but not just students, the many, many people who were prepared to be arrested on our behalf, who demonstrated on our behalf, who boycotted on our behalf, well, they changed the moral climate to such an extent that Congress passed the anti-apartheid legislation, and they even managed a veto override, which was fantastic. And so I just happened. I always say I was a leader by default because our real leaders were either in jail or in exile. And sometimes when people say, and he got the Nobel Peace Prize, I say, well, actually, you know, it was that they thought maybe it was time it was given to a black. And, he has an easy surname. Tutu, Tutu. Imagine if I'd had a surname like Bukakauli, you know.
Archbishop Tutu, how do you feel? How do you feel about...
You can pronounce that.
How do you feel about the invasion and occupation of Iraq?
It was fantastic seeing the many, many people who came out in opposition. It was fantastic. You know, sometimes when you say, Americans, or, people nowadays don't care. It's not true. Millions turned out. Millions said, no, give peace a chance. And I said, as so many others, I wasn't the only one. The Pope said so too. The Archbishop of Canterbury said so. The Dalai Lama said so. That this war, if it was to be a justifiable war in terms of the just war theory, would have to be one that was declared by a legitimate authority. And the administration here was aware of that. That's why they went to the UN. There's no point in going to the UN if you had already decided. They probably, of course, had decided. But I mean, there was no point unless they believed or they realized, I mean, that in order for it to be legitimate and therefore justifiable, the only authority would have to be the UN. And when they didn't get what they wanted from the UN, they did what they did. We said then, and we keep saying so, not just that it was illegal, it was immoral. And the consequences of it just now I mean, you've really got to be blind to say, well, yeah, it's okay, we removed Saddam Hussein. Why didn't you say that was the reason for going? Because the world would have said, no, that isn't a reason that will be allowable for you to declare the war. And I'm sad. I'm sad that we seem so inured now. They tell you 100 people have been killed. And the United States and its allies are doing that. And they say, no, we targeted that house because our intelligence said so. Intelligence. The same intelligence that said there were weapons of mass destruction. Please. That's been done in your name. That mothers and children have been killed. And when you say, what about the civilian casualties? Say, sorry. Our intention was to target insurgents. And most of us, I think, just shrug our shoulders. But you see, you experienced a little bit on September the 11th, the kind of thing that is meted out on a regular basis. And they're not casualties. Collateral damage. Collateral damage, I tell you. How do you feel if somebody says the people who died in the World Trade Center and in Washington, D.C., collateral damage? Say that to someone who lost a wife. Say it to someone who lost a child, someone who lost a friend. Collateral damage. It's an obscenity. It's an obscenity.
We continue to remember the life and legacy of South African Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He died Sunday. His funeral will be held on New Year's Day. We turn now to an interview I did with him in November 2008. We spoke at the South African Vice Consul's apartment in New York. Archbishop Desmond Tutu, it's a pleasure to have you on Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
Your response to the election of the first African-American president, son of an African man from Kenya.
Yippee! No, yippee is actually, it captures something that is almost ineffable. It's very close to the kind of feelings we had on April the 27th, 1994. And maybe a few people in this country have said it was, as it were, the Mandela moment. It's a moment when especially people of color have a new spring in their step. They can walk a great deal taller than they used to. And that even though this country, the United States, experiences very considerable racism, I mean, people being dragged to their deaths behind trucks, yet it's a country that in fact has had this extraordinary experience, and it's something that has filled people with hope.
that the world can be a better place.
How did it feel for you? There were so many millions of people who voted for the first time in this election for Barack Obama. How did it feel for you? How old were you when you first voted in South Africa?
63.
63 years old?
Yes, yes.
When was it? What year?
1994.
For the
1994. That was the first time. And the first time for Nelson Mandela. And he too, this extraordinary human being, and the many, 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 many others. Actually, in a way, you could say white people who had always voted in a racially discriminated election were voting for the first time. Voting for the first time in a democratic, truly democratic election. So we were all, as it were, on the same page. But it was, I said then, when I was asked, what is how do you describe how you feel? I said, well, how do you describe falling in love? How do you describe red to someone who is totally blind? How do you speak about the glories of a Beethoven symphony to somebody who is deaf? Well, it's like that. I mean, I'm over the moon. I'm on cloud 9, as were most of my, if not all of my compatriots on that day.
What do you think is Barack Obama's greatest challenge as president of the most powerful country on earth following 8 years of George W. Bush?
Yes. Very clearly, it has been the fact that for those 8 years, you've had an America that followed a unilateralist line, an America that would not ratify the Kyoto Protocol on climate change. Most of the world had, and America just said, go jump in the lake. Most of the world had ratified the Rome Statute that set up the International Criminal Court, which is where the people who were responsible for September the 11th should have been appearing. That you were going to have, most people believe that he is going to be welcomed as the leader of the free world, who will be more collaborative, who will be more consultative, who will not seem to want to throw the considerable weight of America around and seem to want to be the bully boy. I've said, I did a piece for the Washington Post, and I said one of the things that would demonstrate a clean break from the previous administration would be closing the abomination Guantánamo Bay. And one would then hope that there would be a much more conciliatory approach to Iran, not to say the belligerence that has largely characterized the Bush administration. And I would hope to, and that's a major challenge, that there would be something to be done to bring a viable peace proposal for the Middle East, to end what I reckon is an unconscionable suffering of the Palestinian people. which would end the firing of Qassam rockets on Israeli citizens.
You were blocked from going into Gaza in 2006, leading a UN delegation there after the killing of a number of Palestinians. What do you think has to be done now with the Middle East specifically, with Israel and the occupation?
There's been some very interesting moves with the outgoing Prime Minister suggesting that Israel has to consider very seriously the proposal of going back to the boundaries of 1967. That's a very important initiative if that was taken. I think that we would have to move very quickly to lifting the embargo. The suffering is unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. It doesn't promote the security of Israel or any other part of that very volatile region, and it is quite contrary to the best teachings of the Jewish faith, you know. I know, I mean, that there are very, very many in Israel who are opposed to what is happening, and I pray fervently that there will be a boldness, you know, in saying we've got to resolve this. Because I think if that, let's not say if, because a lot hinges on what happens in the Middle East. Let's say when that is resolved, we're going to find, I mean, that the tensions between, say, the West and the Muslim world, and a large part of the Muslim world, I believe myself we're going to find that evaporates, and that this is a saw chafing, and it's mucking up too many things, and I pray that this new president will have the capacity to say, we've got to do something here for the sake of our own humanity, you know, for the sake of our children.
Would you compare the occupation of Gaza and Gaza and the West Bank to apartheid South Africa?
I have to speak about what I know. I mean, most people, a Jew will usually speak about their experiences and maybe compare whatever it is that is happening with what happened in the days of the Holocaust. For me, coming from South Africa and going, I mean, and looking at the checkpoints and the arrogance of those young soldiers, probably scared, maybe covering up their apprehension that there's no way in which I couldn't say. Of course, that is the truth. It reminds me of the kind of experiences that we underwent. I mean, I was Bishop of Johannesburg, and would be driving from town to Soweto, where we lived, and I would be driving with my wife, and we'd have a roadblock, and the fact of our having to have passes allowing us to move freely in the land of our birth. And now you have that extraordinary structure, that the wall. And I do not myself believe that it has improved security, breaking up families, breaking up, I mean, people who used to be able to walk from their homes to school, children, now have to take a detour that lasts several minutes. It's when you humiliate a people to the extent that they are being, and yes, one remembers the kind of experience we had when we were being humiliated. When you do that, you're not contributing to your own security, and all you are doing is you're saying to those people, in all of their desperation, we're still human, and there are things we will not be able to accept. I mean, just sit down. We have to do something, and so you get the suicide bomber, and one does not condone them, but one understands perfectly how people can be driven into a corner, and out of that desperation. And so you have that cycle, the response of Israel to the suicide bomber, which you know is going to provoke another cycle. And one says, no, that's not how God intended us to live. That it is possible. It's been shown. It happened in South Africa. It is possible for people who have been enemies to begin to think that they can be friends, at least to coexist.
The International Criminal Court, should Barack Obama as president sign on to the ICC? Sign the treaty for the International Criminal Court?
Yes, if you believe in the rule of law, then you're going to say, yes, this is one particularly important instrument, because it is an instrument that is saying we will no longer tolerate impunity. The many who are guilty, as is happening just now in the DRC or in Darfur, that people who are guilty of egregious violations have to be brought to book, and it's got to be done in a way that satisfies those standards that we have. I mean, you don't hold people in detention without trial. That's what the world used to say against the South African government. And if it was true that that was wrong, it has to be wrong consistently everywhere.
President-elect Obama supports an end to the war in Iraq, but a surge of soldiers in Afghanistan. What are your words of wisdom to him?
Well, I said that obviously it's to end the war, yeah, to end the occupation, but I've also said it would be wonderful if on behalf of the American people he were to apologize to the Iraqis and to the rest of the world for an invasion that was based on lies.
The late Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa. I interviewed him at the South African Vice Consul's apartment in New York in November 2008, just after the election of Barack Obama. Desmond Tutu died Sunday at the age of 90. We end today's show with the Archbishop speaking to a group of youth climate activists outside the UN Climate Summit in Copenhagen in 2009.
I want to say a big thank you to all of you, especially you beautiful young ones. We oldies have made something of a mess of the world. And we want to say to the leaders who are meeting, look in the eyes of your grandchildren. Climate change is already a serious crisis today. Yes. But we can do something about it. Yes. If we don't, there's no world which we will leave to you. This generation, you won't have a world. You will be drowning, you will be burning in drought, there will be no food, there will be floods. We have only one world. We have only one world. If we mess it up, there's no other world. And for those who think that the rich are going to escape, we either swim or sink together. We have one world, and we want to live a beautiful world for all of these beautiful, wonderful young generation. We, the oldies, want to leave you a beautiful world. And it is a matter of morality. It is a question of justice.